Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Happy New Year to all my viewers and listeners. Today, I'd like to talk about abductions, alien abductions, and specifically an abduction of someone that claims to have total recall or conscious recall of all his abductions. This individual's name is Jim Sparks, and he first came to my attention when I read about him in Linda Moulton Howe's book. There was a whole chapter on Jim Sparks and Linda Moulton Howe's book, Glimpses of Other Realities. Jim Sparks later wrote his own book. Jim Sparks' book is called The Keepers. So there are many cases where abductees tell of their abductions, but it's as a result of regressed hypnosis. Jim Sparks, on the other hand, claims to have 95% total conscious recall. Sparks said he had completely conscious encounters with small gray drone worker types, taller true aliens or supervisors, and tall reptoids with big human-shaped heads or bodies covered with scales or reptile skin. And this is a quote from his book. His encounters started in 1988 at the age of 34. So Sparks' first encounter with the otherworldly beings took place in 1988 at age 34. He said it was 3:30 a.m. and he was fully conscious of what was happening around him. He woke up by the low-pitched whirling sound in his head. Soon he realized that his body was paralyzed and he could move neither his arms nor legs. And he is quoted as saying, "I'm usually pulled the same way, which I call the hard way, and it's completely physical. My whole body is taken. I wake up from my natural sleep, and then there is the whirling sensation in the pit of my stomach, and it feels like it's coming up into my chest. When it gets up to my heart area, my heart starts beating first, just racing in my head, and a whirring sound starts picking up RPMs and is tremendously loud. It starts low and rises in pitch and screams in your head. The fear is like you're going to die. Your heart is racing 1,000,000 miles an hour, and then you get this acceleration feeling, but I always feel like I'm being pulled down. I never feel like I'm being pulled up. It's like I go down a roller coaster, only 100 times faster, and boom, you black out and you're there, usually on board a craft." Wow. So the feeling is as though he's being pulled down, not up, which is counterintuitive to what I guess most people would assume. Sparks was 100% sure that he was pulled from his bed through the ceiling, as other abductees have also claimed. The aliens have the technology that can create a field capable to move humans and other things through solid matter. What's more, it could make things invisible. So Jim Sparks says that it's their technology. He's quoted as saying, "I knew that the aliens rely heavily on a created field. This field produces several things: the ability to be invisible, the ability to work in one dimension and be partially in another, and the ability to move us poor humans through solid matter. When the field is in action, you can feel it. You can sense it. You can almost feel like you're a magnet." Wow, that must be some feeling. It takes a wall. It takes a wall as you would normally see it, makes it transparent. You walk right through it. So it's a field that somehow separates molecules, changes your physiology when you're in it. That must really feel odd. So everything the aliens do is technology, he says. They just think to their machine and stuff happens. He says it's thought activated technology. Wow, that's awesome. He says on board, Sparks always had the same task to learn and to write alien symbols. So I'm going to show a picture of what he looks like. This is Jim Sparks here. On board, Sparks always had the same task to learn and write alien symbols. At first, his body was always temporarily paralyzed except for his right hand and arm. He resisted a lot, but he soon realized if he didn't cooperate, he would get agony and fear. But when he did cooperate, he would get rewarded with pleasure. The alien symbols were three-dimensional. The alien symbols were three-dimensional and lay symbol over symbol in what became a black spot. So that's interesting that their way of communicating is so different than ours. It doesn't go left to right or right to left. It's laid right on top of one another in a three-dimensional way. It's a three-dimensional conceptualizing construction and projection where it's necessary for comprehension in the alien world. It was sort of common ground for communicating between them and us. Between 1988 and 1995, Jim Sparks was repeatedly abducted several times a month for punishment and reward sessions until he learned all the alien alphabet, several numbers, phrases, and symbols. It looks like script. 20 pages of English text retold in only 2 pages of alien symbols is what we're looking at. Further reduced in 1/2 page in alien shorthand and further reduced in 1 circle shorthand symbols, equivalent to a full 20-page English text. So this is the English alphabet and numbers in alien equivalent in their symbol language. I guess the B looks similar, but everything else looks pretty foreign. And these are drawings of the first letters and numbers that Jim Sparks says the non-human beings or NHIs taught him. And unlike the English language, for example, which is written and understood as static letters on a two-dimensional surface, such as a piece of paper, the alien symbols were differentiated in the number and directions of motions in their construction. A, for example, was right hand to left and left to right, all back and forth in the same short horizontal line. One small symbol could contain 20 pages of information and could be read in seconds. So 3 dimensions were necessary in order for to visualize properly the symbols needed to communicate with the NHIs. When Jim Sparks demanded to know why they were trying to teach him the symbols, he got no response. When he insisted, they paralyzed his mouth and changed their image into police officers. Okay, that's Jim Sparks there.
I never went along with any agenda that they had in mind. One could say that I fought them tooth and nail.
You didn't cooperate with them at all?
No, particularly in the early years.
Was that harder on you, in essence?
Much. I think it brought out I think the will or the fight against them brought out the ability for me to retain a lot of the things that were going on. Secondly, I believe that there are humans that, for whatever reason they pick them, they want to retain the memory or the experience of the abduction. I just happened to be one of those.
What is your emotional state when you come face to face with these beings?
Well, I've been dealing with them for 9 years now. The first several years, it was horrible.
How horrible?
Pure trauma. Well, for starters, you're somewhere that you don't want to be. That in itself is scary. I didn't want anything to do with this, period.
I would imagine it'd be hard to accept the fact that it's happening at all.
Oh, yeah. Well, getting into that, it's... Accepting it yourself is one thing. Explaining it to others, perhaps it's twice a year, maybe 2 times or 3 times a year at the most.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be woken up, and then I'll go back to sleep, sort of like a second sleep or an unnatural second sleep. But I'll be awakened to a low-pitched, low RPM whirling sound that sounds sort of like a whipping, whirling sound. I'll hear it in my head, and it'll get louder and louder and louder, tremendously loud. Then I would lose consciousness, and then the next thing, when I regained consciousness, the next thing I knew is I would be there.
So you're not aware of what happens between point A and point B?
Better than 99% of the time, no, you're not.
Evidence suggests that through advanced technology, our current laws of physics simply do not apply. It seems extraterrestrials have the ability to create a field which, among other things, renders invisibility and even interdimensional transport, whereas time seems to be manipulated at will. Aliens have even been seen walking through walls.
To me, it's like any other technology, for example, a television. It's probably the most simplest tool in the world for one to use. On, off, change the channels. However, if one were to tear it apart, if you weren't a technician to try and figure it out, it would be beyond comprehension. The same thing with their technology. They are advanced cultures, after all, they can come here. And to us, when we look at the technology, it seems extremely complicated, almost magical, as a matter of fact. To coin a phrase, their technology is so advanced it seems like magic. But however, after seeing it time and time and time and time again, and not being traumatized by it because of familiarity, I noticed that it's a field they create somehow, and it enables all these wondrous things.
So you've become somehow acclimated to the field?
Yes, but you're always scared to death. Perhaps the trauma doesn't, or the fear doesn't last as long each time, but yeah, there's always an overwhelming fear at first, because it is completely unnatural.
According to Jim, their technology also allows them to literally be 80% in one dimension and work 20% in another. In some cases, that is why they can be seen as transparent. You can see right through them because 20% of their working essence is here and 80% may be somewhere else, or whatever number they choose, for example, 50-50, 90-10, etc.
Extraterrestrials, in a lot of cases, can be mistaken as spirits, demons, angels, and I think that's been gone out through history.
What other activities are associated with being abducted?
Well, there seems to be, in almost every case that I'm aware of, poltergeist type activities.
Why is that?
They literally go through dimensions in order to go from point A to point B. And what I've also learned in my experience is that there are other types of entities or things that exist in other dimensions that perhaps are spirits or ghosts. For all I know, and it may even be humans.
Are you saying that they follow these beings through these dimensions when these holes or portals are opened up?
Yeah, I think doorways are opened up.
Tell us more about the communication with symbols. Are there holographic images involved?
They create holograms or images that literally hang in the air. For lack of a better explanation, I call it a hologram.
For example?
Sometimes before an abduction, not always, I would get the courtesy of a symbol just before being pulled. I like to call it pulled, abducted, to let me know what kind of abduction it would be. An example, a hologram of an owl would appear. When I would see something like that, that would tell me it's time for school. That's what would happen on that abduction. Some cases, a hologram of a medical instrument. Something like a forceps would appear, and that would tell me this abduction would include medical procedures or semen extraction.
In the early years, Jim usually found himself sitting at a table in an almost completely paralyzed state. In front of him was a screen in which he was forced to learn an alphabet, a number system, and symbols. Over and over again, he converted our letters and numbers to what he thought was their letters and numbers.
As time has gone on, I don't believe that now to be their alphabet per se. I think it was a common ground form of communication. Nothing about this, any of this is conventional. The symbols literally, like the holograms, hang in the air. Interesting about the symbols, though, if I may explain. I had one experience where I read a story in regular language that I understand, our language, and I would say it was probably about 20 pages long. They can take the same story and put it in their alphabet that I was explaining earlier, which would only take perhaps a half a page. And then they can condense that half a page to a 50-cent coin piece like symbol, and all you have to do is look at it and understand.
Besides raw materials for, let's say, worker beings, what other resources do they need from us, or do they steal from us in a sense?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily stealing. It's almost something like what we would do with cattle. Thank God they don't eat us. We do take care of a cow's medical need. We make sure that they have a nice pasture to graze on and so forth. Unfortunately, at the end, they end up at your grocer's freezer. As far as humans are concerned, they've been extracting these raw materials for years and years and years. But I said one reason is they make these worker bees. Another reason I feel almost certain of is for their own longevity. In other words, they have a technology that can extract tissue intact from a human, maybe 1/1000th in size. To give you an example, let's say that field I told you they created, they can actually take 1/1000th of the tissue in an elbow, and you'd wake up in the morning and feel like maybe your elbow's sore. And they can take it and they can overlay it on themselves if the genetic material matches up naturally, and it would regenerate whatever the ailment they may have in the elbow. I think that they farm humans in that way.
So it's more than a coincidence that we have somewhat similar body parts.
I think so. And I think there's a universal rule, which is higher intelligence takes advantage of and uses lower intelligence, not unlike what we do to cattle. And I found myself out in an abandoned, what I thought was a carnival yard or something. But I was out in this open area. There were about a dozen beings standing in a semicircle. Now you got to understand, everything about this was different right from the beginning. I was not paralyzed. These beings were standing in a semicircle. They were huge, they were large, they were bigger than anything I've ever seen. And the first words, or telepathic words out of their mouths, was that we would have just given it to you, but you wouldn't have understood that way.
Meaning?
Immediately I figured that to mean the knowledge of what they were up to with abductees, or at least myself.
During this meeting, Jim was told that it was true that there was contact made between extraterrestrials and world powers. It was true our government was made aware of environmental problems. It was also true that, among other things, technology was given to us in order to stop using nuclear weapons. And according to them, we broke our agreements by making weapons and money out of the technology exchanged.
So there you have it. According to Jim Sparks' testimony, the aliens told them that it is true that we did have an agreement, and I guess that goes back to the Eisenhower Agreement, exchange for technology, and we've had superior technology for over 70 years now, and we haven't been using it.
I think if you can take two generals or several generals and they're sitting back listening to this, and they're thinking, yeah, well, they're benevolent, all of this is well and good, but my God, these guys can come and go in our skies as they please. They can take people in the middle of the night, and there's nothing we can do about it. We need to buy time. We need to negotiate whatever needs to be done so we can catch up with this technology to defend against these guys. You know the military's going to think that way. It's their job to think that way. They're sworn to protect this country.
I can empathize with that. The government was buying time, gather their thoughts and data before they presented that to the public. Problem is they never revealed to the public that they had this technology that was given to them by the ETs that could have improved all our lives, the health system, the food shortage system. So I think this is the reason why people have lost their lives to hide this secret.
How else can they think? Why didn't they tell the average citizen in that day that these things were happening? We were just getting out of World War II. Orson Welles' experience, I think, showed a lot. I think the closest...
This was way before it was revealed that the Orson Welles radio broadcast really did not have the impact that it was publicized to have. It was isolated to a small farming community. It was not countrywide. Most people stayed calm and realized that it was just a radio broadcast.
Thing to extraterrestrials in those days was a swamp monster relative to how experienced people are today. And of course, once again, the paranoia that these creatures can come and go as they please. What if, and I can see military minds thinking this way easily, and I don't blame them. What if we didn't agree with what they wanted to do? What could we do about it? So I think that in those days, they bought time.
The human psyche as a whole,
Well, we broke the agreement, and they didn't become violent. So I don't think that there were large repercussions, and I think the agreement was that raw materials in exchange for technology, and they've continued to acquire raw materials.
collective consciousness of humanity is beginning to respond to these stories and these events, and we are beginning to change our consciousness about this subject matter.
Not only has public awareness increased, evidence suggests that certain unnamed organizations who have knowledge to extraterrestrial existence would like to speak out publicly but can't for fear of prosecution.
This was recorded, obviously, well before David Grush coming out and giving his testimony.
I don't think the government fears so much that if it were to come forward with the truth, people would panic in the street, or the stock market would drop, the church would collapse. By God, we're human beings, we're resilient. Human beings have always been that way. I think they're more concerned with, gee, what are you going to do to me? Because for the sake of national security, I think a lot of human beings and honest, law-abiding citizens have been hurt, tremendously so. Perhaps plenty of lives have been lost over this secret. People have been maimed. People have disappeared, and this goes on and on and on and on for the sake of national security. If you provide an avenue for government officials, perhaps even private industry, to come forward and speak the truth about extraterrestrials without being prosecuted, a lot of the technologies that we have, because we do have technologies that can change things for energy, water, and all those things, that we don't need to hurt the earth to derive the things that we need. There's technologies that can overcome all of that without polluting the earth at all.
Okay, so that was the interview with Jim Sparks, who mentioned that the aliens said that we had broken an agreement with them, which I believe dates back to Eisenhower. And it's too bad because a lot of lives have been lost and ruined in order to safeguard that secret, just for the sake of national security. We broke the agreement, and there's true that lives had been lost, and the agreement, this part of the agreement has not been kept as far as keeping up with the environment. Part of the agreement was that we would improve the environment, and we have not kept up with that part of the agreement. That seems to be, according to Jim Sparks' testimony, more than one NHI competing for raw materials on the Earth. He mentioned the Greys, the Reptoids, for example, and they all seem to be competing for raw materials here on Earth. And they can easily employ sophisticated technology to manipulate, deceive, and even inspire. If you go by what happened to Jim Sparks in his tutorial on the ship, he talks about this field of energy that can actually deceive. It can change the appearance of the ETs to something else. They can be in two dimensions at once with this field. And DNA or raw materials is what they need in order to heal themselves and regenerate and even create other worker drone ETs. But what's concerning is that they seem to see us as lower intelligences and see us almost as cattle where they're farming raw materials from us. Who knows how many ETs have taken advantage of human ignorance, for example, and used sophisticated technology to manipulate and deceive for their own gain. There seems to be both negative and positive agendas that are producing hybrids and maybe even androids on both sides. Both sides are also emphasizing the need to save the Earth's environment, but it's basically for their own vested interests. And lately, I've been thinking that the NHIs, or at least the negative ones, have told the government they would introduce themselves to the public if the government doesn't. Maybe that's why there's such a push for disclosure now. So the government is supposedly setting the stage to introduce the negative ones, and the negative NHIs are planning to help the government clear its reputation, maybe. And they can do this by staging a false event with holographic stagecraft. They could easily do that and play right into the whole propaganda the government's been pushing as to the ET phenomenon being a national security threat. And human minds wouldn't be able to tell what's real and what's not. Here's an example of what we're capable of with holograms. Okay, so here's an example of how far the holographic technology has come. This is footage taken in Dubai. Okay, that's a holographic image. Isn't that incredible? It looks real. It actually looks real, and that's a holographic image, and this was taken in Dubai. Here's another example of how awesome the holographic technology has come. And you can imagine them replacing the image here with, say, an extraterrestrial. And a lot of people buying into thinking that they're looking at an actual NHI or UAP or UFO invasion. Looks so darn real.
At the Game Awards 2023.
Look at that. Wait till he reaches out. That would scare anybody, even if you know it's a hologram, much less if you have no idea that we're capable of these holographic images. Okay, so you can see how far we've advanced with holograms and how easily someone could be fooled if they have no idea that they're looking at a hologram. It's actually 3D. That image of the genie reaching out was so realistic, it would scare anybody, much less somebody that wasn't aware of how far we've come with the technology. So you can see how far we've come with the holographic technology. And if you think about what Jim Sparks said in his testimony, he spoke about a field that the NHIs use in order to deceive. They can create any images that they want. So you add that to our capacity to create lifelike 3D holographic images, and human beings really can easily be fooled. We wouldn't know if there were a real alien invasion going on. The government could easily create a national security threat by creating a holographic image of an alien invasion. I hope that you enjoyed my coverage of Jim Sparks. I thought he was significant because he's one of the few, if not the only, abductee that has given testimony that has 95% conscious recall. The vast majority, if not all, abductees that give testimony, including Betty and Barney Hill, is a result of hypnotic regression. And if you know anything about hypnotic regression, you know that the hypnotist can implant suggestions into the subject, which is a reason why not to be totally confident with any testimony or memories that come out as a result of hypnotic regression. I thought that it was interesting to show how far we've come with holographic images. I want to say Happy New Year to everybody out there and hope everybody is enjoying the holidays. All my love and blessings and good thoughts go out to all. I'm hoping and praying for peace in Gaza and Ukraine as well. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My website is ufo-disclosure.com. My Instagram is UFO Disclosure Podcast. My Twitter is @UFO Disclosure with an underscore at the end. And I have a YouTube channel @UFO-B as in Bravo R3YY. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Happy New Year to all.